Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
Well, welcome back to The Right Wing from Civically Minded, where I give you practical theology for everyday life. As always, I'm your host, Corey Wing. On today's episode, we're taking a sharp look at the first 100 days of President Trump's second term in office. And, well, as expected, it's been eventful. So let's start with the breakneck speed at which President Trump has been moving in these first 100 days. He's signed 135 executive orders in just these 100 days. Now, that's more than any modern president. And through these orders, the Trump administration has moved quickly on things like immigration enforcement. They've rolled back environmental regulations, and they've begun to restructure the federal workforce entirely. But why so many? Well, executive orders don't need congressional approval. It makes them a fast, albeit controversial way to change policy. They're also made and then can be unmade by the stroke of an executive's pen. So, if some of these are to remain enforced, they're going to need to go through the more formal process of becoming a bill in Congress and then successfully being made into law. So, let's look at one of the more controversial things he's done so far. And whether you love it or hate it, nothing has been more polarizing than the new administration's hardline stance on immigration. Signing on January 29th what would become known as the Lake and Riley Act, it would mandate detention of undocumented immigrants charged with certain crimes. Think theft, assaults on officers, or any offense that would lead to serious injury or death. It also allows states to sue the federal government for failing to enforce this law. Now, that is a new legal twist. And of course, we've all seen the massive deportations going to the Supermax prison there in El Salvador. And the president of El Salvador recently coming to our country to kind of further that relationship even more. And of course, most recently, a couple of, well, depends on who you listen to, either MS-13 members that really should be in this prison or, you know, Father of the Year awards from a Maryland hometown. And it's really hard to say who's right there. But perhaps in the most legally explosive move of any of the immigration moves, President Trump issued an executive action aiming to end birthright citizenship for children of undocumented immigrants. Now, that, of course, has landed in court and will likely stay there for some time. Now, I covered most of that topic back in February when I had attorney Davis Younts on the program. So I'll place a link to that here and in the show notes below. If you've not watched that episode, I would really recommend that you go back and familiarize yourself with all that Mr. Younts told us. It was really eye opening to see how far back birthright citizenship goes and why it was started in the first place. Now, on to the Department of Defense, and of course, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Now, he's also hit the ground running, implementing a bevy of reforms within the military and returning our fighting forces to a considerably clearer task of battle readiness. Unfortunately, he and others in his world do seem to have a penchant for discussing these changes over the same app that I and other Christian content creators use for socializing and discussing the world of podcasting. Not exactly the Fort Knox of online security. Just last week, however, he was successful in starting to correct the mistakes made during the last administration concerning the mandatory COVID vaccinations. So we certainly wish him the best of luck there. And as a fellow brother in Christ, I am absolutely praying and want to see him succeed. On a rare bipartisan note, in the first 100 days, Congress passed the Take It Down Act. Now, this act criminalizes the distribution of non consensual deepfake pornography. Platforms now have 48 hours to take this content down after being notified of its existence. And while that's a significant step toward protecting people in the age of AI manipulated media, for us as Christians, the full removal and outlawing of all pornography should be the real goal. The lives of countless men and women have been ruined by this what seems to be ever increasing immorality. The advent of the internet has made pornography more accessible than ever. So let's pray to the end that all across the nation, pornography can be completely abolished. President Trump rolled out a sweeping tariff regime. 10% on almost all goods, and 145% on imports from China. Now, the administration says it's about protecting U.S. industry and reducing dependency on foreign goods. I mean, let's be honest, if you loved Timu, I'm sorry for you, because that love affair is now officially over. The tariffs have now been blamed for everything from consumer indexes, the stock market's volatility, as well as labor uncertainty and ongoing inflation, of course. And while they can and do impact each of those areas, the policy of ignoring the rampant theft of intellectual property and the undercutting of American goods and services by other countries has its own significant economic fallout. We've simply grown used to it over the years, and we've become proficient at ignoring those outcomes. So here's where it gets a little tricky. President Trump has claimed that the tariffs are bringing in roughly $2 billion a day. But the official data from US Customs and the Treasury Department tell a somewhat different story. They claim about 200 to 263 million a day. Now that is still significant money, but not even close to the president's claim, and maybe that's embellished, maybe it's not. Time will tell. However, as of last Thursday, April 24th, 2025, total revenue from the new tariffs stands at a whopping $15.9 billion. If that can be translated into some real tax savings for us as Americans, boy, what a game changer that could be. I know I'd sign up for less, if not just fewer income taxes. How about abolishing them altogether? And maybe the most corrupt tax of them all, the death tax and property taxes. Can we get rid of those? I'd gladly pay more for all of my goods and services if the property that I own and all of my labor wasn't taxed. So maybe we can push toward that. Now, while we're on the topic of financial belt tightening, the administration also moved to reduce the federal workforce, especially targeting roles focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or the oversight thereof. Now, some of these layoffs are already facing legal challenges, and the lawfare and stonewalling that began in President Trump's first term hasn't seemed to slow down a bit. Progressive judges in equally progressive districts are more than happy to push back against the administration and, of course, attempt to make a name for themselves in the process, if not to parlay that into notoriety or a greater position in the future. Who knows? Maybe they can just get in as an analyst for CNN or MSNBC. That's a pretty cush job everyone seems to like. In the world of international diplomacy, we've also seen some fireworks. After a volatile and highly entertaining meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance both on February 28th.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't.
Well, that produced no concrete peace agreement or real move forward, honestly. It seemed that there wasn't a clear path for American involvement in this conflict moving forward. The president was unwilling to continue the Biden policy of unlimited financial hemorrhaging, merely pouring more American treasure into a seemingly insatiable war that showed no signs of slowing. The conversation that day in the Oval Office ended up resembling something like a teenager getting a stern talking to from his father.
You're playing cards. You're playing cards.
It was rather bizarre for world leaders to be discussing things in that manner. But as I said earlier, I found it highly entertaining. Oddly enough, from even there, though, it would be Pope Francis's funeral just last week that would offer the two world leaders a second chance at negotiations. This time, thankfully, with cooler heads. Some would say this was the final act of grace given by the now deceased pontiff. And finally, what's been more talked about, well, of course, immigration probably number one and tariffs number two. But by golly, coming in at a close third is going to be what President Trump has been calling the big, beautiful bill. It's a sweeping legislative proposal. If it's passed, it would extend his 2017 tax cuts, it would ramp up energy production, it would tighten immigration enforcement, and it would cut federal spending by a large margin. But, of course, as all things with a Trump regime, because of such pushback, it's already causing friction inside not the Democrat Party, which we expected, but of course within his own Republican Party, especially among fiscal conservatives. With a government shutdown that was already narrowly avoided within the first 100 days, the next 3+ years will be nothing if not thrilling. Now, if the Republicans want to hold on to their majorities come the midterms, it's imperative for them to start working together and seeing some significant policy wins that go beyond the immigration and anti woke agendas, but that would move into helping the average American's checkbook. Voters, remember, are notoriously fickle and they have short term memory loss, almost as bad as, like, say, Snoop Dogg or Willie Nelson after a night at Bonnaroo. So, my advice, not that they asked, is to rack up as many wins as you can and keep them coming. The Democrats have mostly self destructed. But remember, Westley in The Princess Bride was also mostly dead.
Well, it just so happens that your friend here is only mostly dead. There's a big difference between mostly dead and all dead.
And we all know how that ended. So, what do the first 100 days tell us? Well, one thing's clear: President Trump's second term is not just a sequel, it's a full throttle effort to reshape the federal government, the economy, and the rules of the game, and to do so as quickly as he can. As Steve Deace and I talked about at the Dangerous Friends Conference, and again, if you've not watched that episode, I'll link it here and in the show notes below. One of the things that President Trump has done right is keeping the left so engaged, so busy, with so many things to follow, that he's pushing through quite a bit while they're catching their breath. So let's continue to push forward. And us as Christians, let's continue to pray for our leaders on both sides of the aisle, knowing that as Jeremiah was told by God during the Babylonian captivity, the city's success is your success. So pray for your leaders and pray that God continues to bless America. Now, if you found today's breakdown useful, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a comment. It really does help more people cut through the noise and get to the practical theology that we offer here at Civically Minded. So until next time, I'm Corey Wing. And remember to be brave, be bold, be civically minded. God bless.